Welcome to the Heart Centered Life podcast, a podcast that helps you cultivate a life where intellect, emotion, and intuition align. Each week, we bring you tools, resources, or guests to help you find that space where your true happiness resides and encourage you to meet the world's deep hunger from that place. Because we truly believe that when your deep happiness meets the world's deep hunger, miracles happen. I'm your host, Elena Boyd. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the final episode for the month of June, where we wrap up a reflection of adventure and what that means to heart-centered living. In this month's adventure booklet and in our interviews with Tamika and Kimmlyn Archie, Lee Chambers, and Dan Zehner, we discuss the meaning of adventure, and in their own way, this month's guests described their own life adventures and how that involved both having the curiosity and the bravery to do something. So, what is curiosity and bravery? Curiosity is defined as me seeking out situations where I gain new experiences without getting in my own or other people's way. And bravery is defined as me acting on my convictions, and I face threats, challenges, difficulties, and pains despite my doubts and fears. The two definitions for curiosity and bravery I got from the VIA Institute on Character. And actually, as a side note, I just wanted to mention that I came across the VIA Institute on Character when I was preparing for this podcast episode. But I really like them, and I encourage you to check them out because they are based in Cincinnati, Ohio, but they are a non-profit organization that is dedicated to bringing the science of character strengths to the world. And they do that by creating and validating surveys of character, and they support researchers and develop practical strengths-based tools for individuals and professionals, such as therapists, managers, and educators. On their website, they have a VIA survey that will help you identify your greatest strength and teach you how to bring that to your professional and personal life. And it's offered free of charge worldwide in several different languages. So you can take the survey on their website. I think it's very helpful. And the link is in the show notes below. But back to the topic of adventure. So adventure equals having the curiosity and the bravery to pursue a particular course of action or to do something. And as I had mentioned just now, the VIA Institute on Character defines curiosity as seeking out situations where I will gain new experiences without getting in my own or other people's way. And bravery as I acting on my convictions, and I face threats, challenges, difficulties, and pains despite my doubts and fears. So the doubts and fears do not hold you back from facing the challenges that may be ahead of you, the difficulty that may be ahead of you. If we think about adventure as going out to do something adventurous or exciting or never done before, it may seem that today or lately, adventure has been put on hold. Many of us were under stay-at-home orders for months or for weeks when the pandemic hit the US back in March on a more widespread level. And most of us, even today in June, are under self-imposed stay-home orders, even as states have lifted their mandatory orders to shelter in place. we've kind of self-imposed stay-at-home orders on ourselves to kind of protect ourselves and our community. But when we look at adventure at this time and think about adventure as seeking out new situations and experiences and facing challenges despite our doubts and fears, it becomes clear that these last few months have indeed been an adventure in itself. For many of us, um, in a completely and new in a completely new and different way from going out and doing something adventurous. The adventure that we've been involved in lately has involved going within and looking at ourselves, our relationships, and our lives, and exploring that with curiosity and bravery. And that's a little bit different from what we conventionally understand adventure to be. Going out into an external environment, taking on the world, doing new exciting things with curiosity and bravery. So, in this poignant time, and I was reflecting about adventure over the month, it seems as if instead of choosing the adventure this time, the adventure chose us, and it found us. So, which leads me to my question to help us reflect on adventure for the month of June. How are you experiencing adventure and employ curiosity or bravery this month? How did we look at ourselves, our relationships, and our lives with the eyes and spirit of adventure this month? So let's begin with ourselves. Um, COVID 19 has undoubtedly caused a lot of pain and suffering on people, families, communities worldwide. And the virus has presented an illness that is by no means controlled at this time this episode airs. But in the midst of the pandemic that has set the US down an economic spiral of such scale or scope that that hasn't been seen since the Great Depression, it's a really poignant time in our history. Just a couple of days ago, the U.S. has recorded a record high number of new COVID-19 cases, 50,000 in a single day. So we're living in a very poignant time in recent history, and not only has COVID-19 highlighted um, brought illness into our communities and in our society, but COVID-19 also brought to light a different type of illness that's not physical, but rather spiritual. And that illness has impacted more people than COVID-19 has. And that illness is racism. And that follows the many cases of police brutality against the African American and Native American citizens in the United States. And racism requires us to think about the solution to bridging racial divides and remedying systemic injustices and prejudices that have caused terrible things such as mass incarceration, biases in the criminal justice system, racial displacement, unequal access to the healthcare system, and I can go on and on and on, that disproportionately affect our African American and Native American citizens in the United States. So the challenge for many of us is how do we address the root causes of racism and not just the manifestation of the illness in our um, institutions, not just one institution, but several institutions, even academia, um, manifests racism in different ways, economic, health, and education systems, and of course our culture. And to find the root cause might involve many painful conversations and soul searching that can be difficult and scary. And it's going to be really, really hard. Think about it. How do we unpack 400 years of perpetuating racism against particular groups of people. Unless we approach these conversations and soul searching with curiosity and bravery, as if it was an adventure, and think of it as an adventure into our inner lives and the way we see the world, those conversations and soul searching that is so necessary will not be productive and effective, especially if we approach them from a standpoint of fear and trepidation. But if we think of those conversations and soul searching as an adventure into the unknown, so as opposed to going, or maybe alike in some ways, many ways, the same as going out into the wilderness, um, or jungle trekking in the rainforest, the conversations and soul searching that we may have to undertake with respect to how racism manifests in our society and how to deal and address the effects of that. If we can look at that as an adventure, then we tend to lose the fear and trepidation that comes from what is undoubtedly very difficult and uncomfortable conversations. And if you remember that adventure equals curiosity plus bravery, then these difficult conversations and soul searching become more of a venture into uncharted territory that could lead to a beautiful oasis or the peak of a beautiful mountain, rather than a waddle into an uncomfortable or disconcerting space. Those conversations and soul searching will be more easily broached and handled, and it will lead to more productive results. So, the question then becomes, how do we see a huge challenge like this of having a truly honest conversation about healing racial injustices that have gone on for hundreds of years as an adventure that we approach with curiosity and bravery rather than a forced necessity exacerbated by the circumstances that we have found ourselves in today? So, here is my suggestion on how to think of any challenge. Um, and you can apply this to the particular challenge that I'm talking about in terms of having this difficult conversation. But here's my suggestion on how to think of any challenge as an adventure rather than a forced necessity, right? Or an adventure that you pursue, or rather than an adventure that is kind of imposed on us, and we don't really have a choice but to embrace it. So I'm going to use the acronym SWIM, SWIM, because to me, swimming is an adventure itself for someone who doesn't know how to swim. So even though I grew up in Malaysia, which a lot of people consider to be an island, a tropical island, it's actually a peninsula that looks a little bit like Florida, coming off South Asia. Uh, but we are essentially surrounded by water, and I cannot swim, and so for me swimming is an adventure. And so I thought about a good acronym that might help us unpack um, the meaning of adventure, and how to embrace adventure when it comes to a challenge like what I've just described. I've used SWIM as the anchored acronym. So what does SWIM stand for? S stands for suspending fear. We need to suspend fear. W stands for withholding judgment. I stands for initiating the first step. And M stands for managing expectations. So how do these words play out when we think about approaching a challenge that's before us, whether it's having a difficult and uncomfortable conversation about not just race, but it may be about a relationship, right? It may be a conversation that you absolutely have to have with a colleague, uh, or a difficult or challenging situation like starting a business or a fitness program. So what do this acronym stand for, or what does the acronym stand for? So S means suspending fear, and we all know that feeling when we talk about fear. Fear really triggers that intuitive reaction to fight uh, with a situation or flee from it. So that's the the fight or flight response that actually has a lot of biological and evolutionary purposes. But the flight and fight response, and I'll talk about that in a little bit, but our flight and fight response increases our breathing, our heart rate increases, the peripheral blood vessels on the skin, for instance, constrict. The central blood vessels around vital organs dilate to flood them with oxygen and nutrients, and muscles are pumped by blood ready to react. So you either fight the situation or you flee. And biologically and evolutionarily, that fear has served us really well when we are walking with our tribe, say, in a prehistoric jungle, and a saber-toothed tiger jumps out at our tribe. That's when our flight or fight response becomes important, because that allows us to turn around and run from a predator which is trying to catch us and eat us, or it may provide us with the adrenaline to fight off the animal so that, again, we don't end up as its meal. But that fear can be a disservice to us today, um, because that fight or flight response can cause us to avoid things or fight things that cause our breathing and heart rate to increase. Just as they would if we were chased by a saber-toothed tiger. But our breathing and heart rate increases as well when we are going on an exciting adventure, such as whitewater rafting down the Colorado River in the Grand Canyon, something that I've always wanted to do, or having a difficult and uncomfortable conversation about race, or moving on with a business decision or a fitness program. Those things that are new and exciting to us causes the very response that we would get if we were confronted with a situation where our safety and our life was in danger. Um, but those things, the exciting adventure that we should pursue, isn't going to threaten our life or safety. So, if we want to have that adventure and have that conversation that we need to have, or pursue the business that we want to have, or the fitness program that we want to pursue, we absolutely have to suspend our fear and think of that challenge as an adventure. And again, I want to make a note that there is a huge difference between suspending fear and ignoring legitimate fear when we really are in danger. Suspending fear means going beyond our comfort zone, but we always need to remember to keep within our safety zone. So, what that might mean is don't go whitewater rafting down the Colorado River when you know that there might be a flood coming in. So, that's what I mean by going beyond your comfort zone, but always keeping within your safety zone. So, that's that. S is for suspending fear. Next, W is for withholding judgment. So what does withholding judgment mean? It's good to remember that important for us to make sound judgment by engaging our intuition, our intellect, and emotions together, all at the same time, or aligned together. We arrive at a better understanding of a situation and we make better decisions when we do that. But the thing about judgment is that unless we are clear about the mental processes we take to arrive at that judgment and taper that with a healthy dose of intuition and emotion, Our judgments are often prone to systematic and severe errors. Cognitive psychologist Daniel Kahneman won the Nobel Prize in Economics in 2002 for the then groundbreaking work on how people think and make decisions. And of course, Kahneman's work cannot be separated from that of his close collaborator, Amos Tversky, who passed 6 years earlier. And as some of you may know, the Nobel Prize cannot be granted posthumously. So Kahneman accepted the Nobel Prize, but he's always felt, and he did say that in an interview, that the prize was really shared between him and Tversky because of their work together. But in relation to judgment, what their work demonstrated was one important fact about our cognitive processes that help us make judgments about everything in life, from what we decide to buy at the grocery store to what we wear in the day, to whether we become an organ donor or not. Most of the time, our decisions and judgments are made by set beliefs and simplistic principles. They call them heuristics, and we may be more familiar with the word biases, that influence our decisions about that influence our decisions without us even knowing about it, or realizing how they actually cause us to make decisions one way or another. So, how things are framed, the words, the sounds, colors, scents that we encounter, how much something affects us emotionally, all these have a huge role to play in our cognitive processes and the judgment that we eventually make. But all this happens in the back of our mind, and when we are seldom conscious about it, unless you've read Kahneman's and Tversky's book and the body of work in that field, and then we become a little bit more aware of how biases and heuristics affect our decisions. But for the most part, it happens subconsciously, which is why before we've even spoken with certain people, we've already decided for ourselves that they are going to behave in a particular way. And this decision was made even before we engage with them, and actually find out for ourselves whether the assumption and judgment that we've made about them is right or wrong. Which is why we judge, and then we fear people who look different from us, or we judge and fear the adventure that lies ahead instead of taking a step into the unknown and exploring the beauty that the adventure might uncover. Um, and when we judge, we step back in fear and lose out on the magnificent adventure that could have unfolded. And whether that adventure would involve a conversation, the pursuit of a goal, or going out into the unknown. So when you hear yourself saying things like, well, I think that, or chances are, or maybe that, or it's unlikely that, stop yourself in your tracks, withhold that judgment, and let things unfold. You never know what kind of adventure will await you if you withheld judgment. So that's W. Next, I is for initiating the first step. Once we've addressed two of the most significant barriers to a more adventurous life, fear and judgment, we need to initiate that first step to approaching life as an adventure. The first step is always the hardest, and the second and the third is also pretty hard. But once you've taken that first step, the next one does get easier. And it comes more easily. And before you know it, a completely new world has opened up to you as you take one step after another. And this is all because you took the very first step. So to take that first step, ask yourself, what's one thing I can do in this direction, and just do it. What's that one thing you can do to initiate that conversation? Maybe invite a person to a virtual cup of coffee. Say, hey, would you like to meet me on Zoom or Google Meet or whatever online platform that you might use to have a meeting in these times and say, hey, would you like to have a virtual cup of coffee with me? And take that as the first step. Or sending that very first email to a business colleague, or um, putting on your shoes and walking out into the yard. So, what's the very first step you can take in the direction that the adventure is pulling you toward? And just take it, even if it's just making a phone call and writing and sending an email. So that's I, initiate the first step. And finally, M is for managing expectations. The one thing about adventure that I've come to realize through my own reflection is that an adventure involves many highs and lows. Now, I remember the time when I had just finished at Cambridge and had returned to Malaysia, and I was staying back with my parents for a while. And a good friend of mine from Cambridge, Ning, invited me to visit his home in Kuching, Sarawak, which is a Malaysian state in a Borneo island to which I've never been before. Um, I've only seen pictures with the large hornbills and the sun bear that are all populated there. But he invited me to uh, his home in Kuching, Sarawak, which was on the Borneo Island, right in the middle of the South China Sea. So I accepted the invitation. I went there. It was a 2-hour plane ride from Kuala Lumpur, where I was living with my parents at that time. And when I got there, he invited me to go jungle trekking with him and his family. It was an exciting thought. I mean, we talked about it. We went to bed early the night before. We were excited about the journey the next morning. We got up really early in the morning, and it was really exciting. We were going to go jungle trekking, and I was thinking of, I was going to be like Mary Kingsley or Kira Selleck walking into the unknown. So it was really exciting. So we started on the boat trip up river, and the river would eventually lead to the South China Sea. So we went up this, we got on the boat right up river, and we were dropped off at the edge of a jungle, and we started trekking. And I think we must have trekked for something like 5 hours or so, um, through the hot, humid, equatorial jungle with mosquitoes, leeches, sweat dripping down my forehead, and thirsty. And after about 2 hours of walking into the jungle, I was ready to give up. This was no adventure. This was just a walk into this unknown in a damp tropical forest with still air. And this was not the fun, happy, exciting adventure I had expected just the day before. And to be honest, I didn't even know where we were going. I was just following my friend and his family. Uh, and we were trekking for all those hours in this damp, dark rainforest. So we were just going and going and going. And eventually I noticed there was this pathway where the light came through the darkness. And it was so pretty in that we were in this dark rainforest, and there was this sliver of light coming through. And Ming, my friend, who obviously has been down this jungle trek many times, got really excited and started walking faster and faster towards that path. And I followed him and his family through that pathway, through all this thick green rainforest fauna, and crickets in my ears and all that. And the forest then opened up into the most beautiful oasis by the South China Sea. And it was so beautiful. The waters were crystal blue. We could see right through, right to the bottom. The sand was clean and white. Uh, and the wet, damp, darkness of the jungle opened up into this beautiful, breathtaking, clean tropical oasis. There wasn't any other way to this very spot, at least not that I was aware of, other than the jungle trek. And possibly by boat, but Borneo Island is huge, and I would think that some parts are inaccessible even by boat, maybe by air. But the place that we ended up, maybe by air, you might be able to get there by air. But the place that we ended up was so untouched and unaffected by the modern world, that it didn't seem that many people went there. Um, so uh, and that was more than 20 years ago, and I hope that place remains the way I remember. I haven't been back since. But the point that I want to make with this story was that adventure, whether of the external kind, where we go outside and conquer the world, or of the internal type, where we go inwards and overcome our self imposed limitation to create a better life for ourselves, our families, our society, or build better relationships and bridges, to address injustices, in our society, involves difficult times and really trudging through a lot of unpleasant experiences to get to that oasis of peace, hope, and light. And that place where differences can be bridged and and years of hurt, healed, um, and where we are able to look out into our future and see the best of what is to come. Getting to that peak does require us to manage our expectations, of the journey, and sometimes that journey may not be easy, but the end result is always worth it. So the final step in the life of adventure is to manage our expectations so that we can truly savor and take in all the beauty and goodness at the end of the adventure. So there you have it, the acronym to help you live in a life of more adventure and to embrace adventure is essential to heart-centered living because adventure allows us to align our intellect, intuition, and emotions perfectly. So remember, swim, suspend fear, withhold judgment, initiate the first step, and manage the expectations. So that's all for now. I hope you enjoyed June's episode. I hope the month of June was a good one for you, given our current situation. But it was a good, productive, a rewarding one for you. The episodes in July will be on the theme of creativity, and I have exciting guests lined up as well, to talk to us about creativity. And I also encourage you to download our creativity booklet that will be available um, next month, uh, to help you incorporate creativity into your daily life to support your journey to a more heart-centered space where your intellect, intuition, and emotion align. I look forward to talking to you next week. Bye. Thank you for joining us this week on the Heart Centered Life podcast. Make sure to visit our website, www.elinaboyd.com, where you can subscribe to the show in iTunes, Stitcher, or via RSS so you'll never miss a show. If you found value in the show, we'd appreciate a rating on iTunes. Or if you'd simply tell a friend about the show, that would help us out too. Be sure to check out some of our programs on how to cultivate, create, communicate, and inspire others from a heart-centered space. Tune in next week for our next episode where we will help you find a place of deep happiness so that you can meet the world's deep hunger and watch miracles unfold.